Hello everyone and welcome to the Bronki Boosters podcast. It's a series where we invite healthcare specialists to speak to us about asthma. We'll discuss topics such as what causes an asthma attack and how to manage it, myths and facts about asthma, and many more. Asthma is often an underdiagnosed and undertreated public health problem. Learn how to manage your or your children's asthma. On today's show, we've got Professor Claudia Gray. Professor, thanks for joining us. Let's talk asthma. Let's talk the different types. Are there different types of asthma?
Right, well, first of all, to set the scene, asthma is a condition in which the airways which run into our chest are overreactive or hyperreactive. And this has got several components to it. If you look at the airway like a pipe, if you slice it, it's inflamed and swollen inside, and then the muscle around the asthmatic airway is also hypertrophied, which is enlarged and more reactive than it should be. So asthma has different components. Many people in this world have asthma. It's one of the most prevalent non-infectious diseases. We talk about the types of asthma. As with many things in medicine, there's quite a blurred line. So the basic types of asthma would be extrinsic or allergen induced asthma, or intrinsic, where it's not caused by a particular allergy, but you have a naturally hyperreactive chest. And the line is often blurred, so it's not even that important to say what type of asthma you have. The important thing is to diagnose asthma correctly, to embark on a good treatment program, and to identify your triggers. So what may make asthma worse? And these are things such as allergens, if you're allergic, infections. So often little kids, when they're ill, their chests get tight with an asthma attack. Exercise, in many cases, emotion. So anxiety or fear or excessive laughter or temper tantrums in kids can set off an asthma attack, and irritants such as tobacco smoke and chlorine. So there are different causes, but it's more important to look at the triggers of asthma.
Do you find that people can be undiagnosed in terms of having asthma for a large portion of their life, and one day they kind of go and try and find out why they keep having these recurring symptoms only to find they have asthma?
It could be the case, Ryan, but hopefully not too often that it's a lifelong undiagnosed matter. But it can be more subtle. So when the airway is hyperreactive, we've talked about the swelling, we've talked about the muscles pulling tight. The symptoms that manifest would be most classically, but not always, a wheeze, so a whistling sound when you breathe out, or a cough, or tightness of breath and shortness of breath. And some people have a cough variant asthma, so their main symptom is indeed a cough rather than a wheeze. And such people often go undiagnosed for a long period of time and feel that they've probably just got nasal allergies, but in fact it is a form of asthma. But the more classical asthma with recurrent wheezing is more easily diagnosed.
Medication. Do you take medication your entire life for asthma? Is it treatable for the duration of one's life once diagnosed?
Yeah, that's a good and tricky question. Medication is safe enough to take your entire life, so I'd like to reassure that it is. But some children who are asthmatic outgrow the asthma, so it's not always a lifelong condition. Some people only become asthmatic when they're adults, so then it's also not a lifelong condition. Certainly, asthma is very controllable. Obviously, there's a degree of severity. Some people have mild, intermittent asthma. Some people have more severe, more persistent asthma, and they'll have a different prognosis. But in general, asthma is very well controllable. So if you'd like to talk a little bit more about treatment, I can.
Absolutely.
So there are many modalities of treatment, but the main categories are a preventer. So that's something that's taken every day for long-term control, and then you get your relievers, which are fast relief. Now the relievers are generally relaxants of the muscle around the airway, so they act quickly and effectively if you're really tight or you're coughing. But it's absolutely important to know that it's not good, in fact dangerous, to just treat asthma with a reliever when needed. So the correct approach to good asthma management is taking a controller every single day.
Right.
Those controllers can take many forms. There are some tablets available, especially for the younger kids, but your mainstay of asthma controller treatment is actually an inhaled drug, so something you breathe in, so it goes directly to your target market.
Sure.
And the inhalers have a variety of different ways that they're given, so you choose it according to the age and the ability of the patient. They may need a special spacer device, and they're based on steroid or corticosteroid molecules, and that name steroid sets a lot of people say, whoo,
that's familiar.
But people have to know that inhaled steroids, they go to the chest, they stay in the chest, and they do a lot of good work in the chest. They reduce the swelling, they reduce that hyperreactivity, and they barely get into the system.
Oh, wow.
So it's much safer to take your asthma pump for years and years and years than to have recurrent attacks and need to take oral steroids, for example. So there need not be a phobia about inhaled steroids whatsoever.
I think and I like this because we're sitting in front of a couple of kids' pictures, it means that parents have brought kids to see you because they've needed to have their kids diagnosed. At what stage should a parent go, okay, this is not just a common cold, this is not just a changing of season or whatever other excuse they'd give to that condition, it's time to go and see a specialist?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because many young children wheeze, and they can wheeze when they're sick, especially with colds and viral illnesses, but not all of those kids go on to develop asthma. So essentially the differentiator is in asthma, you don't just wheeze or cough when you're sick, but also in between, and those are called sort of interim symptoms or a multi-trigger wheeze. So that you also wheeze or cough when you're exercising, or in the early hours of the morning, or when you get cold, or when you get upset, or if you're swimming in a chlorinated pool, for example, or if you are exposed to certain allergies. So usually in asthma, there are multiple triggers of the wheezing so that it actually can interfere with your everyday life. My cutoff in young children for wheezing is 3 times a year. If they're wheezing more than 3 times a year, they need to come and see a specialist to see if they need asthma treatment. There are also certain risk factors that make you more likely to have asthma, and that's a family history of asthma, that's a personal history of other allergic conditions such as food allergies, eczema, or an allergic nose. And also if you have skin prick tests that are positive, for example, to allergies, and you wheeze, then you're more likely to have asthma. So if there's a family history, recurrent wheezing, especially not just when you're ill, or if you're allergic otherwise, it's more likely that your wheezes or recurrent coughs are due to asthma.
Thank you so much. This was such a great chat with you, very insightful. I know we're just touching the surface on asthma, but thank you so much for your time, Professor, and once again for the very insightful chat.
Absolutely, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Pop your questions in the comments section below. Also remember to visit bronkiboosters.com to view all the videos, learn more about asthma, play the game, or download the comic book.